Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Lindner. Welcome to Anatomy and Physiology 1. And what I'd like to do in this introductory video is to go over some of the basic disciplines of anatomy and physiology. Then we'll discuss some of the organizations of the human body. We'll go over some anatomical reference terms, which is really important to know. We'll talk about um, uh, quadrants and regions and homeostasis and disease. We'll kind of get into a little bit to lay down some foundational work for the rest of the course. So when we look at anatomy and physiology, one of the things that I want you to keep in mind is that it's the science of structure and function, right? Structure determines function, or form and function, whichever is easier for you to remember. So, anatomy really is the science of structure, whereas physiology is the understanding of how things work, right? The science of the functions. Now, we can look at structure in a variety of ways, and what you'll be doing in lab is either doing dissection or looking at models and looking at the structure of things, whether it's bones and whether it's muscles, whether it's the brain, right? I mean, if you look at for example, let's say right behind me, I have this little doorway here, right? And it opens and closes in just this manner. Why? Because of these hinges. So if we look at an elbow, it's a hinge joint. It allows for flexion and extension like this, but it's a modified hinge. It's a modified hinge joint because it can also supinate and pronate, right? But the structure of it determines the function. So that's what you'll be looking at throughout the course is analyzing the structure of joints, looking at the direction of muscle fibers. It all helps you figure out how it's going to work. Okay, but anatomy is the science of structure and physiology is how it functions. We'll be getting into a lot of detail in terms of muscle physiology, for example. We know you will understand that the brain sends down messages down the spinal cord to the muscle. Where they meet is called the neuromuscular junction. And there's a lot of magical things that happen right there to allow and permit the muscle to contract. So in anatomy, we're going to study a bunch of structures, whereas the physiology is the function. And when you look at some of these terms, it gives you different branches of anatomy. So if we're studying the first 8 weeks of development after fertilization, we call it embryology. When we're looking at cell structure and function, cellular biology. When we're looking at structures that can be examined with the naked eye without the use of a microscope, that's gross anatomy. Okay. When we're looking at from a functional standpoint, the functional property of nerve cells is neurophysiology. When we're looking at hormones and different chemical regulators in the blood that help control and regulate homeostasis, that's endocrinology. That's something that we'll discuss along with cardiovascular physiology and immunology and respiratory physiology and kidney renal physiology. That will come in A&P2. When we look at levels of organization, this is really neat because this helps us understand, again, structure and function. So at the very basic level, we have chemistry and a bunch of chemicals come together, whether it's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. These come together, these chemicals come together to create cells. And then we have a bunch of cells that come together to make up tissues. And then a bunch of tissues come together to make up organs, and then similar organs that work in alignment with one another, like we see here between the mouth and the esophagus and the stomach and the liver and the intestines. Now we have an entire system, in this particular case, the digestive system. And then when we take all the 11 systems together, we get the organism. So Chemicals come together to make up cells, cells make up tissues, tissues make up organs, organs make up systems, and systems make up the organism. Now, if we go back here to the chemical level, if you're missing carbons or hydrogens or oxygens or nitrogens or phosphates, if you're missing any of these or they're not in balance to one another, now the chemical structure is distorted, which means the cellular structure will become distorted. You'll see that when we get into the cell membrane itself is made up of proteins, carbs, and fats. And in order to get carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, we need carbons, hydrogens, oxygens, nitrogens, etc. So any imbalance to your chemistry is going to create an imbalance to the cells. An imbalance to the cells will create an imbalance to the tissues, which dominoes into an imbalance to the organs, an imbalance in the systems, and an imbalance to the organism. And this is one of those things that you kind of knew, but maybe you didn't know that you know, because if you think of conception, once a woman is pregnant, what do most doctors want to ensure that the woman is rich in within her body? Folic acid. Because folic acid, especially in the form of methyl tetrahydrofolate, MTHF, methyl tetrahydrofolate, is really important for the neural system to develop. It's really important for the digestive system to develop. It's important for things to make a complete enclosure, like for the lips to close and for the spinal cord to close. And when things don't close, you get like cleft palate or hair lip or meningomyelocele, where the spinal cord grows outside of the skin in the back. Okay, so hopefully it kind of puts it in perspective. And I would make sure that you know this from smallest level to largest, or from largest to smallest. You can put it in order. When we look at cytology and histology, simply put, cytology is really the study of everything that's happening with the cell, but histology is what's happening with the tissues. And tissues is a pretty broad lecture. When I get into tissues, I'll talk about the 4 different types of tissues, which is epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and neural tissue. Those are the 4 types of tissues. When women go to the gynecologist and the gynecologist does a pap smear, they're looking at the tissue type. And the histologist will look at the cells that make up that tissue to determine normal versus abnormal, right? Pap comes from the term Papinaculau, which is Dr. George Papinaculau, who was the physician who discovered the pap smear. Okay. And they look at the size of the cells and they analyze its structure. And again, good structure, good function, bad structure, bad function. There are 11 systems of the human body, from the integumentary system, which is hair, skin, and nails, and the skeletal system, which we think of the bones and the cartilage, and then muscles, 3 types of muscle. There's smooth muscle, skeletal muscle, and cardiac muscle. We're primarily interested in skeletal muscles. Then we have the neural system, brain and spinal cord. Brain and spinal cord is referred to as the CNS, the central neural system. And anything that grows from those structures but outward, like from the brain outward, that would be cranial nerves, or from the spinal cord outward, that would be spinal nerves, that would be referred to as the PNS, or the peripheral neural system. So we have the central neural system and then the periphery or peripheral neural system, which is everything else that grows outside of those structures. The endocrine system, we're thinking hormones, primarily these chemical messengers, and the endocrine system and the neural system work together to maintain homeostasis. And that's a term I'll get to in just a little bit. The cardiovascular system, heart and blood vessels, the lymphatic and immune system, really important, the respiratory system, digestive system, urinary system, and the reproductive system. So let's take a look at these systems and give you a little bit more of a basic understanding of this. When we talk about the integumentary system, we're talking about the skin, the hair, the fingernails, toenails, sweat glands, oil glands. And when you think of the integument, primarily the skin, it's designed to protect the body. It helps to regulate temperature. It helps to eliminate waste products from inside the body to out, just like sweating. Okay. It helps to remove toxins. The skin is involved in helping us produce vitamin D, right? We need sunlight hitting the subcutaneous cholesterol on the skin, and that subcutaneous cholesterol on the skin will then go to the liver. The liver hydroxylates that cholesterol. It goes to the kidneys where it hydroxylates it again. And then we have the usable form of vitamin D for the human body. It's involved with the sensation, just as you know someone is touching you or poking you. It helps you differentiate between soft touch versus painful touch, cold, temperature, and it's involved in storing fat that helps to provide us with insulation. So it's extremely important, the integument. Now, on the right-hand side, we're looking at the skeletal system. Now, going back for a second, the integument system, this is going to be the first system we get into. So after we do, the chemistry, and then we get into cells, and we do tissues, the integument is the first system we'll get into because it's made up of all four types of tissues. Okay, within the skin, the dermis and the epidermis and the hypodermis, we will find epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nerve tissue. Okay, now when we get into the skeletal system, we're talking about bones. Now in the center, we have the axial skeleton. And when we talk about the upper extremity and the lower extremity, we're talking about the appendicular system. Now the bones are going to protect us, right? The skull is going to protect the brain, and the 24 freely movable vertebrae will protect the spinal cord. We have 24 freely movable vertebrae. We have 7 in the neck. We have 12 in the mid-back, thoracic region. And then we have 5 in the lumbar region. So 7 cervicals, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar. Just remember you eat at 7 a.m., 12 noon, 5 p.m. 7, 12, and 5. The bones are the site in which muscles will attach. It's the site where ligaments attach. So muscles attach to bones. Those are called tendons. Ligaments also go from bone to bone. Tendons go from muscle to bone. Another important function of the bones is that they act as a reservoir. They store nutrients. They're going to store some vitamins. They're going to store some minerals. Really important. They're also involved in producing red blood cells and white blood cells. So the production of blood cells in general is called hematopoiesis. When we talk about red blood cells, it's called erythropoiesis. Red blood cells are called erythrocytes. So erythropoiesis is red blood cell production. When we talk about muscles, what we're seeing in this picture are skeletal muscles, because these muscles attach to your skeleton. But the other 2 types are cardiac muscle and smooth muscle. Cardiac muscle deals with the heart. Smooth muscle deals with muscles around certain organs, like a female uterus. The uterus is muscle. And that smooth muscle, the smooth muscle in that region called the myometrium, can constrict. It can contract. We have smooth muscle around blood vessels. They can constrict or dilate. When blood vessels constrict, blood pressure goes up. When blood vessels dilate, blood pressure goes down. The intestines have smooth muscle. When the intestines are dilated, bowel movements are easy. When the intestines are constricted, it can result in constipation. So here we have skeletal muscles. Skeletal muscles attached to bones, and they help to locomote us. They help provide movement. They help us walk. They maintain posture. And muscles can also produce heat. We know that when we exercise and muscles are contracting, we perspire. That is a negative feedback loop to help cool us off. If the body is too hot, we need to cool off the body. So a negative feedback loop would be perspiration to help cool off the body. We know that when one has a fever, let's say 103, 104, and the fever needs to go higher, but maybe it won't, muscles start to shiver, right? The person feels cold, but as the muscles are contracting, they're generating heat. Okay, on the right-hand side, we have the neural system, and the neural system develops at around day 18 or so after sperm and egg come together. The neural system is considered to be the master system. It controls and coordinates all of the other bodily functions. It is the first system that develops, and it is electrically excitable, especially the neuron that makes up the neural system. That neuron is electrically excitable. The neural system takes in sensory data or sensory information. The brain will process that information like a computer has a processor, and then it spits out a motor command. So sensory input comes in, we have processing of that information, and then motor output goes out. Incoming information is typically referred to as ascending or afferent information. And then output information is called motor or efferent information. Motor or efferent. So afferent comes in, efferent goes out. Sensory in, motor out. The endocrine system, we see a lot of different parts here, like up in the brain, there's the pineal gland, and there's the hypothalamus, and there's the pituitary gland. These are all in the brain. So we'd think, hey, this belongs to the neural system, but there's overlap into the endocrine system. Then in the throat, there's the thyroid and parathyroid glands. Then near the kidneys, we have the adrenals, right? If you look at the word adrenal, renal means kidney. Add means you're adding something to the kidney. That's the adrenal, also known as the suprarenal gland. Supra means above, infra means below. So suprarenal means above the kidneys. The pancreas, the ovaries, the testes, right? Ovaries and testes are part of the reproductive system, but they do produce hormones, so they overlap into the endocrine system. So they're going to regulate bodily activities by releasing hormones, which are really these chemical messengers that are going to be transported in the blood from these endocrine glands or tissues to another part called a target gland. And again, they're going to help regulate homeostasis. The cardiovascular system, we're talking about the heart and the arteries and the veins, all the blood vessels. So the heart is going to pump, and it's going to pump its blood through the blood vessels. It's going to carry oxygen and nutrients to all the cells of the body, and it's going to use the blood vessels also to help eliminate waste products and carbon dioxide. So we're taking in oxygen and we're blowing out waste like CO2. It's involved in regulating the acid-base balance of the body, the temperature of the human body, and water content and fluids within the human body. Okay. And the blood vessels are involved with helping to transport different components in the blood that help us defend against disease, like antibodies, right? So now we're talking about white blood cells. The lymphatic system is what we consider the immune system. We'll get into that in anatomy and physiology too. But some of the components are lymphatic fluid, and then we have the spleen, the thymus, your lymph nodes, your tonsils, and they're going to carry out different immune responses that involve B cells and T cells. The function of the lymphatic system is to return proteins and fluid to the blood. It's going to carry fats or lipids from the GI tract, your gastrointestinal tract, to the blood. And it contains sites of maturation and proliferation of the B cells and T cells. So the B cells are going to develop and mature in the bone marrow. That's the B for bone marrow, and T for thymus. The respiratory tract We're thinking of the lungs and the airway, right? The pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, and a little bit deeper in the bronchial tubes, the lungs, the alveoli, the deeper part of the respiratory tract. And it's going to transfer oxygen that we inhale into the blood, and it's going to help us eliminate the carbon dioxide from the blood through exhalation. The lungs are also used to regulate acid and base balance of the human body. When you look at acids and bases, we are looking at, let's see if I can get my pen up here. We're looking at 0 to 14. And right in the center would be 7, which is neutral. And anything from 0 to like 6.999999, that's going to be an acid. And then everything above 7.0 is going to be a base. Okay. And our blood pH is somewhere right around here, which is like 7.35 to 7.45. And any extreme shift to that can result in death. So the body has a lot of these built-in mechanisms to help modify pH and always keep it in a state of flux. Okay. Okay, the digestive system, the digestive tract is the mouth and the pharynx and the esophagus and the stomach and the small and large intestine. We have some accessory organs as well, like the salivary glands in the mouth, the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas. These are accessory organs. They're major players in the game because they are producing lots of digestive enzymes to break down food, but they're considered accessory organs. And they're involved in the entire GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract, or the digestive system, is involved in physically breaking down food and also chemically breaking down food so we can properly absorb them and absorb the nutrients within them, and then to eliminate the waste products. Right? Think of it, you got teeth, they grind mechanically to break down the food, but then you have digestive enzymes to also break them down. Whatever's not fully broken down in the mouth is going to take place in the stomach, it's going to take place in the intestines and the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas. Those accessory organs are going to help to break down the carbohydrates, the proteins, and the fats. The urinary system, or the kidneys, the ureters, the urinary bladder, the urethra, these are going to produce, store, and eliminate urine. Okay, they're going to eliminate urine, which is composed of waste products. And again, it's involved in also regulating the volume and the chemical composition of blood. It's also involved in that acid base, one of the mechanisms of regulating acid and base balance within the human body. It's also involved in homeostasis of minerals, because if there's too much calcium, you can urinate some out. If there's not enough calcium, you hold on to it. If there's too much glucose or sugar in the body, you get rid of it through urination. If there's not enough, you hold on to it. The kidneys are also involved in red blood cell production, or erythropoiesis, since all the blood is being filtered through and by the kidneys in addition to the liver. But the kidneys make the perfect organ to assess what is the blood pressure like and what is the oxygenation levels like. And if there's any change, there are certain hormones that the kidneys produce to help increase red blood cell production, okay, to help with oxygenation. Reproductive, the female and male reproductive, if we look at the gonads, the male has the testes, the female has the ovaries. There's the uterine tubes, the fallopian tubes, uterus, vagina, mammary glands in the female. And in the male reproductive tract, there's the testes and the epididymis and the vas deferens or ductus deferens, the seminal vesicles, the prostate, and the penis. The gonads, if it's the testes, its function is to produce sperm. And in the female, the oocyte or the eggs, the ovaries, are designed to produce the eggs. Both are also involved in hormone production as well. Okay, we'll take a break here. When we come back, we'll get into some of the characteristics of the human living organism.